The screen hadn't even connected fully when Riven Selim pressed his gloved hand flat against his desk. Static. A flicker. Then light, warm and golden. He expected anger. Maybe a slammed door. Maybe the call to disconnect before a single word dropped. Instead, there was a room. A small apartment. Lamplight the color of honey pooling across a wood floor. And Soren Vale, the Omega he sent away 2 years ago, was holding a baby. Riven's chest locked. He didn't breathe. Didn't move. His fingers stayed pressed flat against the desk as if the pressure could keep something inside him from spilling out. Soren hadn't looked up yet. He was shifting the child slowly, the way people move when they're trying not to wake something fragile. His shoulders were low. Tired. The kind of tired that lives in bone, not just muscle. The baby was small, wrapped in yellow fleece. One tiny hand curled tight against Soren's shirt like it was the only anchor in the world. And then breathing. Riven heard it. Soft. Steady. A sound so small it shouldn't have reached him through a screen. But it did. His body reacted before his mind caught up. Something moved inside his chest. Shifted. Like furniture dragged across a floor in the dark. Slow and wrong, and impossible to stop once it started. Hi viewers. Have you ever had a moment where your body understood something your mind wasn't ready to face? Drop a comment below, because this is exactly where Riven's world begins to crack wide open. Soren's head lifted slowly. He didn't look shocked to see Riven on the screen. He didn't look angry either. He looked the way people look when they've already rehearsed every version of a moment so many times that the real thing just lands quiet. He just said, low and even, he just fell asleep. Riven's gloved hand moved to his mouth before he chose to move it. He was Alpha Prime of the Selim Syndicate, one of 3 identical triplets who controlled the financial underground of Chicago with the kind of precision that never showed up in a courtroom. He had survived 2 assassination attempts. He had ordered operations that never made the news. He had stood in rooms full of dangerous men and felt nothing. He felt something now. Soren adjusted the child again. The tiny hand tightened. A small sound, not quite a cry, just a breath that caught, came from the bundle of yellow fleece. And Riven didn't move. He didn't ask the question he needed to ask. He just watched the sleeping baby's chest rise and fall. His own breathing slowed to match it. The call was supposed to be about a Milwaukee audit, a financial anomaly, a loose end. He stared at that small curled hand, and the word audit dissolved completely. The marble foyer had been cold that night. Not the kind of cold that comes from weather. The kind that comes from a house that forgot how to be lived in. Riven had been standing at the center of it. Jacket still on, blood from a graze wound dried on his collar, when the door opened and Soren walked in carrying something he hadn't expected. A test. Thin plastic. 2 lines. Soren held it flat in his palm like evidence. Like he was already preparing to be cross-examined. The assassination attempt had happened 4 hours earlier. A courier vehicle, a rerouted convoy, a bullet that clipped the left side of the car where Riven had been sitting. Internal betrayal. Someone inside the Selim Syndicate had fed coordinates to a rival Omega Council trying to crack the Alpha Triarchy. Everyone in that marble house knew what that meant. An heir in that world wasn't just family. An heir was a target, a lever, a reason for enemies to move first. Kyan had said it plainly. If they can't get to you, they'll get to what matters to you. Daster had said nothing. He hadn't needed to. Soren stood in the center of the foyer with 2 lines on a plastic stick, and Riven looked at him for a long time without speaking. He wasn't cold. He wanted to be clear about that. Even in the silence of his own memory, he wanted to be clear. He wasn't cold. He was calculating. There is a difference, except that from the outside the 2 look identical. You have to go, Riven said. Soren didn't flinch. Didn't argue. He looked down at the test in his hand for just a moment. Then he looked back up. Go where? Away from Chicago. Away from the syndicate. Away from anything connected to me. Soren's jaw moved once, then stopped. For how long? Riven hadn't answered that, because the honest answer was, until I fix this. And he didn't know when that would be. He told himself it was protection. He told himself the distance would create a clean perimeter. That no one could use something they couldn't find. He told himself a lot of things in marble rooms while Soren held the test and waited. I'll make sure you're set up. Money. A location. Everything you need. Soren nodded once. Slow. That nod was the thing Riven would not stop turning over later. Not the leaving. Not the test. The nod. The way Soren accepted it without throwing the test at him. Without screaming. Without doing any of the things Riven had secretly braced for. He just nodded. Then he set the test on the foyer table, carefully, like it was something that deserved to be placed gently, and walked to the hall closet to pull his bag down from the top shelf. He'd had a bag packed. Riven noticed that detail 2 years too late. Soren left before the car was even arranged. He walked out the front door in a coat that wasn't warm enough for the season and didn't look back. Riven stood in the empty foyer. The marble floor caught every echo. He had just survived a bullet. And somehow the silence left behind by one person leaving quietly felt louder than any gun. The snowstorm started at 11 and didn't stop until after 4 in the morning. Soren hadn't called anyone. Not Riven. Not the 2 contacts in Chicago who still checked in occasionally out of professional obligation. Not the midwife he'd been seeing in Milwaukee who had given him a number to dial if anything starts early. He didn't dial it. He was alone in an apartment on the 3rd floor of a building that smelled like old radiator heat and somebody else's cooking. The windows were completely white. The heat clicked and hissed in the corner. His go bag was by the door out of pure habit, not because he'd planned anything, but because packing a bag was a behavior that had become automatic a long time ago. He breathed. That was the only plan he had. Keep breathing. The labor was not what anyone describes. It was not dramatic. There was no clean crisis moment where the body either broke or held together. It was slow and relentless, the way real pressure usually is. Not a wall falling on you all at once, but a ceiling lowering inch by inch until you understand that the room is getting smaller and there's nothing to do but stay in it. He stayed in it. At 2 in the morning, when the snow had buried the window ledges and the world outside had gone completely silent, something changed in the quality of the room's air. A sound. Small. Sharp. Not loud, just precise. A cry that had never existed before cut into the stillness of that apartment. And Soren pulled his son to his chest before he'd even fully processed what he was holding. He stayed like that for a long time. Heat from a small body. The smell of something new. The crying settling down into something softer. Breathing. Fast at first. Then evening out. Soren pressed his mouth to the top of the baby's head. Closed his eyes. He had a name ready. He'd had it ready for months. Lyric. Not after power. Not after legacy or lineage or any of the things that governed every decision in the world he'd come from. After a song. A specific song, or really not even a song. Just a sound. A low, unconscious hum Riven used to make when he was working late and thought the room was empty. A sound Riven didn't know he made. Soren had never told him about it. He'd held it instead. Quietly. The way you hold something that belongs to someone who doesn't know they've left it behind. He looked down at his son's face. Scrunched and new and furious at the world the way all new things are. Lyric, he said out loud for the first time. The baby's hand opened, then closed again slowly around Soren's finger. Soren's throat tightened. You deserved better than strategy, he whispered. He meant it for the baby. But the words sat between them in that silent room, and somewhere in the part of him that hadn't fully stopped listening for a phone call that never came. He knew he meant it for himself too. Riven did not call. He told himself it was clean, structured. That distance was a controlled decision made by someone operating at the highest level of a system that did not have room for sentiment. He had enemies who paid people to monitor sentiment. Caring openly, in his world, was the same as leaving a door unlocked. So he kept the door locked. He signed 3 new expansion deals in the 4 months after Soren left. Denver. Atlanta. A silent partnership in a Seattle logistics firm that existed primarily to move money at speed. Kyan handled the Denver meetings because Riven didn't trust himself to sit across a table from people who were watching his face for cracks. Deister watched him the way Deister always watched. Still, careful, saying nothing until the moment he said something that landed like a stone in still water. You're checking Milwaukee. Riven looked up from a contract revision. The Midwest corridor has 3 anomalies in the last audit cycle. You're checking Milwaukee specifically. Silence. Daster set down his coffee. I'm not judging you. I'm just naming what it is. Riven returned to the contract. He had drafted 4 texts to Soren. All 4 were still sitting in a folder he never opened, titled with a date stamp and nothing else. He hadn't deleted them. He hadn't sent them. They existed in a middle space, intention without action, which in Riven's world was its own kind of weight. The first one just said, "Are you okay?" He hadn't sent it because okay was a vague question and he hated vague questions. He hadn't sent it because he didn't know what answer he was hoping for. He hadn't sent it because if the answer was yes, if Soren was simply fine without him, entirely fine, fully adjusted, Riven wasn't sure what that would do to him and he needed to be sure before he asked. The gloves stayed on. He'd worn black leather gloves since before anyone in the syndicate could remember. It was not affectation. Soren had once asked about them, quietly, during a night when the house was empty and Riven was sitting at the kitchen island eating something cold from a container. Riven had said it was habit. Soren had looked at his hands the same way he looked at everything, like he was reading something that hadn't been translated yet. He missed that look. He didn't say that out loud. His youngest brother, Ezra, the third triplet, the quiet one who had nothing to do with the syndicate's operations and everything to do with its finances, flagged the anomaly in the 5th month. Milwaukee, Midwest Financial District. Someone opened a small commercial account that lists a Chicago reference code 3 layers deep. It's nothing. Probably nothing. Riven looked at the flag for exactly 6 seconds. Then he opened a new screen and initiated a video call to a number he had not deleted. He told himself it was about the account. His hands were cold under the gloves. He watched the call ring and felt something he hadn't felt in 5 months. Fear. Not the operational kind. Not the kind that sharpened you. The other kind, the kind that lives low in the body and doesn't have a strategy for itself. The call connected. The screen came to life. Soren was standing in the kitchen. The light behind him was that same honey gold. A counter. A dish rack. The ordinary architecture of a life built in a place Riven had never seen. For one beat. Just one. Soren looked directly into the camera like he'd already known the call was coming. Then he shifted slightly and the baby was visible. Asleep in the crook of his left arm, head tilted toward Soren's chest, mouth barely open. Riven said nothing. He couldn't locate a single word. Soren said, "He just fell asleep." Riven's gloved hand moved. His palm covered his mouth before he decided to move it. He stood there. Alpha Prime, Selim Syndicate, Chicago's most untouchable man, and pressed his own hand to his face like he was trying to hold something in. "What is his name?" he finally said. His voice came out lower than he expected, rough somewhere in the middle, like something in his throat had shifted and hadn't found its place yet. Soren looked down at the baby before he answered. Lyric. Riven went completely still. He knew that name, not because he'd heard it before, because he understood immediately and precisely where it came from, and the knowledge of it hit him somewhere behind the sternum like a door closing in a house he didn't know was still standing. He hadn't known that Soren had been listening. He hadn't known anyone was listening during those late nights when he worked at the kitchen island in the dark and let sound come out of him without intending to. Just low sound, just rhythm, just something his body did when the pressure of the day needed somewhere to go. He hadn't known, and Soren had held it, had carried it all the way to Milwaukee, had named a child after the part of Riven that didn't have a strategy for itself. The baby opened his eyes, slow, dark, blinking at the light the way new things do when the world is still strange to them. Riven's chest stopped moving. Those eyes, they were his, exactly his, not similar, not the way people say babies look like someone to be polite. Exactly. The same shade, the same depth, the same particular stillness that sat in the center of them. His brother's eyes were the same. He'd looked at that color in mirrors and in his brother's faces for his entire life. He had never seen it look small before. He had never seen it look new. "He looks like me," Riven said. Very quiet. Not a question. Soren held the baby closer. He looked at Riven through the screen for a long moment. The way he used to look at things he was reading without a translation. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He just let the silence be what it was, which was not nothing, which was everything. Lyric blinked again. His small hand shifted. His mouth made a sound too quiet to be a cry. Just air, just presence, just a person indicating that they were there and the world should know it. Riven watched that small hand open and close, and realized he didn't know one single thing about how to hold a baby. He had run a syndicate from the age of 22. He had restructured 3 underground networks in under 4 years. He had decisions inside him that lawyers would spend careers untangling. He did not know how to hold a baby. He did not know if Lyric liked to be rocked. Did not know if he had a particular sound, some small rhythm that settled him when he cried at 3 in the morning in a Milwaukee apartment during a snowstorm. Soren knew. Soren had been there for every version of all of it. And Riven had been in Chicago drafting texts he never sent and monitoring a financial district he had no real reason to monitor, and telling himself the door being locked was the same as the door being safe. Lyric made the small sound again. Soren shifted him. Moved without thinking, the automatic fluency of someone who had learned a person's weight and rhythms by necessity. Riven watched, could not look away. So, if Riven showed up at that door tomorrow, would you let him in? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the next chapter is where things get real. Soren didn't hang up. That was the first thing he could have. The call had been listed as a business inquiry. Riven's contact ID flagged through the syndicate's secondary line, not his personal number. Soren had looked at the screen for 3 full seconds before he answered. He answered, and now they were here. Lyric had gone quiet again. His mouth had found Soren's collar, and he was pressing his face into it, the way babies do when the world has too much air in it. Soren stood at the kitchen counter and held his son and looked at the screen. Riven hadn't moved. Still standing. Still wearing the gloves. Still with that hand, the one that had covered his mouth when he first saw Lyric. Now gripping the edge of the desk like the desk was keeping him standing. I thought I was protecting you, Riven said. His voice was low. Not rehearsed. Just low. The kind of low that comes from something that has been sitting in the chest for too long and finally found enough space to leave. Soren looked at him for a moment. From who? Silence. Not an awkward silence. Not a cold one. The particular kind of silence that happens when a question lands somewhere true and the person it lands on doesn't have an answer that holds up. Riven's jaw moved once. Stopped. He didn't have one. He had thought he was protecting Soren from enemies. From exposure. From becoming a target in a system that turned everything close to power into leverage. That had been the logic. Clean. Structured. The kind of reasoning that sounds right in a marble foyer at midnight after you've just survived a bullet. But Soren's question cut through the architecture of it. From who? Because the enemies hadn't known about the pregnancy. No one had. It had been 2 lines on a test and a man standing in a hallway and a decision made in under 3 minutes. There had been no credible threat to Soren specifically. There had been fear, Riven's fear, unnamed and unexamined. Dressed in the language of strategy. And Soren, who had always been better at reading rooms than most people were at reading books, had known that. He hadn't said it. He had just packed a bag. I thought keeping distance kept you safe, Riven said finally. Distance kept you comfortable, Soren said. Quiet. Not angry. Just accurate. That landed. Riven didn't defend it. He stood in his office in Chicago. 3 floors above a city that had never asked him to be anything other than controlled. And let the accuracy of that sentence sit where it had landed. Lyric made a small sound. Both of them looked at him at the same time. The baby's hand had moved from Soren's collar to his own face, pressing one small palm flat against his own cheek like he was checking that it was still there. His eyes were open again, dark and steady, watching the light in the room do nothing in particular. Riven watched him for a long moment. Does he sleep? The question came out before he calculated it. Soren looked up, and something in his face, not softened exactly, but rearranged, shifted just slightly. Not always, he said. Better now than he was. Better than what? Than the first 3 months. A pause. What were the first 3 months like? Soren looked at him for a beat, like he was deciding something. Then, hard. One word. No elaboration. But the way he said it, the weight of that single syllable carried every 3 a.m. And every empty room and every moment Soren had looked at a phone and decided not to dial. Riven heard all of it. He didn't look away. Lyric reached toward the screen. His arm extended in that clumsy, determined way babies have, reaching for something bright and lit and moving without knowing what it was. Riven leaned forward without thinking. And through a screen, 2 feet apart and 600 miles apart at the same time, the reach landed in the space between them like a question neither of them had figured out how to ask yet. Riven made the offer on a Tuesday, not a command. He was clear about that in his own head before he said anything, and he was clear about it out loud when he said it. I want to come to Milwaukee. Soren was quiet. Not to discuss terms, Riven said. Not for the audit. Not for anything syndicate-related. Another beat of quiet from the Milwaukee end of the screen. Then for what? To meet him. 3 words. And the weight of those 3 words was different from anything else Riven had said in this call or in any call for the past 2 years. Because it was not strategy. It was not protection framed as strategy. It was not distance dressed as care. It was just the truth of what he wanted. He wanted to be in the same room as his son. Soren looked at him for a long time through that screen. The kitchen light hadn't changed. Lyric was balanced in the crook of one arm, half asleep again, mouth slightly open, completely unconcerned with whatever his father and the man on the screen were working out. You'd come alone? Yes. No team. No security detail. Yes. And if it doesn't go well, then I leave, Riven said. You say the word and I leave. No argument. Soren shifted Lyric slightly. Looked down at him for a moment, then back up. I need to think about it. Okay. And that was it. No pressure. No second ask. No explanation of why he deserved to be trusted with a yes. He said okay and let the call wind down and sat in his office in Chicago for a long time after the screen went dark. Kine came in at some point, leaned in the doorway, looked at Riven's desk. You're going to Milwaukee. It wasn't a question. Possibly. For business. No. Kine was quiet for a moment. Good, he said. Then he left. That was more than Riven expected from him. Daster's reaction was different. He pulled up the syndicate's internal air vulnerability doctrine, a 40-page operational document that had been in place for 11 years, and set it on Riven's desk without a word. Riven opened it. Read to page 12. Then he pulled up the draft revision he'd been putting off for 3 months. Found section 4.7. The clause that classified an alpha's unclaimed heir as an external leverage risk, justifying the physical separation of bonded partners in the interest of operational security. He read it twice. Then he deleted it. The revision went to the syndicate's internal legal channel at 8:43 on a Tuesday night. No announcement. No memo to the council. Just a structural change issued quietly the way real decisions usually move. He didn't know yet that someone on the council would flag it. He would find out by Thursday. But on Tuesday night, with the clause gone from the document and Soren's okay sitting somewhere in his memory like a held breath, Riven stood at his office window and looked out at Chicago and let himself want something that wasn't tactical. He wanted to know if Lyric had a sound, a particular sound that settled him. He wanted to know what Soren had named the feeling of doing all of that alone. He wanted to stand in a room that smelled like that apartment, old radiator heat and somebody else's cooking and something new underneath it all, and be a person who showed up. Not a strategy, not a structure, just a person. His phone lit up Thursday morning. Council member Aldrich Voss, requesting an emergency session. He looked at the notification for 3 seconds. Then he typed back, declined. The revision stands. He booked a flight. The leak moved fast. By Friday morning, 3 financial outlets in Chicago had received anonymous tips. Nothing confirmed, nothing named directly, but the implication was clear enough for anyone paying attention. The Alpha Prime of the Selim Syndicate had an unregistered heir. An Omega in Milwaukee, a situation the council hadn't approved. Riven found out from Ezra, who found out from a contact at one of the outlets who owed him a favor. It's controlled so far, Ezra said. He was the quiet one. The one who tracked numbers instead of movements. He said everything like he was reading a balance sheet. Flat, precise, no theater. But whoever sent it wanted it to move. This wasn't accidental. Riven already knew who. Aldrich Voss had been on the council for 9 years. He was old-school syndicate, a man who believed that any softening of the air vulnerability doctrine was not reform but exposure. That compassion in a power structure was just vulnerability with a better name. He had voted against Riven's ascension to Alpha Prime 4 years ago, and had been watching for cracks ever since. He'd found one, or tried to. Riven didn't call an emergency session. He didn't issue a counterstatement. He didn't announce anything. He made 3 calls. The first one was to a syndicate lawyer in a Chicago office 12 floors below his own, who received a set of instructions that translated into a new financial protection structure. One that would make Soren and Lyric invisible to any council member trying to locate leverage. The second call was to a Milwaukee contact he'd been quietly maintaining since month 3. An address verification. Clean. Structural. Someone who could confirm that the apartment building had a working security door and that the third-floor unit was not accessible from the exterior stairwell. He had the lock upgraded before noon. Not dramatically. Not with a team. 1 person, 1 hour, an invoice that went through a holding company 3 layers deep. Soren didn't know yet. The third call was to Kyan, who listened to the full situation without interrupting, and then said, "Voss moved because you changed the document. That means the document change worked." He's scared of it. Riven hadn't thought about it that way. He thought about it now. Real power doesn't announce itself. It restructures the room. And the fact that Voss had panicked, had leaked something this soft, this unconfirmed, to 3 mid-level outlets instead of doing something structural, meant that he didn't have stronger tools available. He was working with what he had, which meant Riven's change had already landed where it needed to land. Saturday morning. Soren's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. Said, "They know where you are. Be careful." No name. No context. Soren read it twice. Then he looked at the door. Then at Lyric, who was asleep in the small bassinet by the window, arms stretched above his head the way babies sleep when they feel safe. Soren picked up his phone. He called Riven. When the call connected, he said, "Someone just warned me." And Riven said, "I know. The lock on your building was changed this morning. You're not being watched. I made sure of that." A pause. "You already knew. I was handling it." Soren was quiet for a long time. Riven. "Yeah. When are you coming?" He had expected more questions. More distance. More of the careful space Soren had been maintaining for 2 years like a well-kept fence. Instead, just that. "When are you coming?" "Tomorrow," Riven said, and didn't sleep. He came alone. No car service. No security. He took a commercial flight out of O'Hare at 7 in the morning with a carry-on bag and the same black leather gloves he always wore, and sat in a middle seat between a woman reading a magazine and a man who fell asleep before takeoff. Nobody recognized him. He wasn't sure if that felt strange or exactly right. The cab to Soren's building took 11 minutes. He knew because he counted. Not deliberately. Just because his brain needed something to do with itself and the buildings passing outside the window weren't holding his attention the way math usually did. The building was a 4-story walk-up on a quiet street. Red brick. A hardware store on the corner. A dry cleaner 2 doors down with a handwritten hours sign taped to the inside of the glass. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the cab pulled away. No entourage. No protocol. No layer of insulation between himself and whatever was about to happen. Just a door. He'd stood in boardrooms where men twice his age had gone pale. He had managed those rooms the way you manage weather, by reading the pressure before it shifted. He was not a person who got nervous. He was nervous. He went inside and climbed 3 flights and stood in front of a door that was painted the same color as every other door in the hallway and knocked. He heard movement. Then quiet. Then the door opened. Soren was standing there holding Lyric. Not the Soren from the screen, though it was the same face, the same eyes. This was the full version. 3-dimensional. Real. Standing in a doorway in a gray shirt and bare feet with his son on his hip and a look on his face that was not warm and not cold and not anything Riven had a clean name for. Lyric looked at him. Big, steady eyes. Dark. Identical to Riven's in a way that still hadn't stopped landing. The baby reached. Not toward anything specific. Just out, arm extended, finger spread, the way Lyric reached for anything lit or moving or new. Riven didn't think. He knelt. Right there in the doorway. One knee on the hallway floor, gloved hand rising slowly. Not grabbing, not pulling, just presenting. And Lyric's small hand found his finger and closed around it. Riven stopped breathing for a second. The grip was stronger than he expected. Tiny, but deliberate. The baby held on like he'd already decided. Soren watched this from above. He didn't speak. He let it happen. His eyes moved from Lyric to Riven and back once, and his jaw moved in a way that he controlled before it became anything visible. Riven looked up from the floor. Soren looked down at him. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere on another floor, a TV was on. The radiator in the wall was making that sound. Metal expanding in heat, old and rhythmic and completely indifferent to the thing happening in this doorway. "If you're here," Soren said. "Lo, careful." Each word chosen. Be here fully. He wasn't asking. It wasn't a condition being negotiated. It was something that had been said before it could be swallowed. A line drawn not in anger but in the exhausted clarity of someone who has survived a thing and refuses to survive it twice. Riven looked up at him from the floor. His son's hand was still wrapped around his finger. He said, "I understand," and stood up slowly, and walked inside. He didn't know where to put his bag. That was the first thing. He stood inside the door of an apartment that was modest and clean and arranged with the careful intention of someone who had made a limited space feel like it mattered, and he didn't know where to put his bag, and he didn't ask, and he set it near the wall by the entry, and that felt like the right choice. Soren moved to the kitchen. He didn't explain anything, didn't give a tour. He just went to the kitchen and started what appeared to be a feeding preparation. A small bottle warming in a pot of water on the stove, formula measured with the automatic precision of someone who had done this several hundred times. Riven stood near the entry. He watched. Lyric was in a bouncer seat near the kitchen window. He was looking at his own hand, turning it, examining it with the total focus of someone encountering a new object, which is exactly what it was. Riven had the impulse to say something, announce himself, introduce himself to his own son through some kind of formal gesture. He didn't. He just sat down on the floor near the bouncer. Lyric looked at him. They stayed like that for a minute, just looking. Lyric's eyes moved across Riven's face with no judgment and no history. Just registration. Here is a person. Here is a face. Here is something new. Soren set the bottle on the counter to cool and turned around to find Riven on the floor. He looked at him for a moment, said nothing, went back to the bottle. That night, after the feeding, after the burping, after the small panicked cry at 11 that Soren handled with the automatic ease of long practice. Riven sat at the kitchen table while Soren moved around the apartment doing the last small things before sleep. Locking the window latch, turning the hall light off, checking the monitor. Ordinary things. Things that had been happening in this apartment every night for months without Riven in them. "He likes to be patted," Soren said, not looking at him, folding a small cloth on the counter. Flat hand, middle of his back. Not rubbing, just steady pressure. Riven filed that. "He does better in the bouncer than the crib for the first part of the night. I move him when he's deep enough." Riven filed that too. "He's been sleeping 4-hour stretches for about 3 weeks. Before that it was 2. Before that it was less." Pause. "I'm telling you this," Soren said, "because if you're going to be here, actually here, you need to know how this works." Riven looked at him. "I know I have a lot to learn. You do. I'm not going to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen." Soren was quiet. "I'm not asking for fast," Riven said. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just..." He stopped, looked at the table. "I just want to be in the room." Soren turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at him. Really looked. The way he used to in the marble house, reading something that hadn't been translated yet. "Kyan called me," Soren said. Riven's eyebrows lifted slightly. 3 weeks ago, before you did. He said, "My brother made a wrong call and he doesn't know how to say that." He said, "If Riven reaches out, it's real." Riven stared at him. He was going to have a very long conversation with Kyan. "I already knew it was real," Soren said. "I just needed to hear it out loud." The apartment was quiet. In the bedroom, the monitor made the small static sound of a baby breathing in sleep. Steady. Even. A person in a room indicating that they were there and the world should know it. Riven looked at the baby monitor on the counter. The small green light. He thought about 2 years of marble and silence and texts he never sent and a name he had carried without knowing someone else was carrying it too. He thought about a child named after a sound he made in the dark. Silence used to feel like strength to me, he said. Soren waited. Now it just feels like something I never want to survive again. The kitchen light hummed. Soren didn't say anything for a moment. Then he pushed off the counter and walked to the cabinet above the sink and pulled down 2 cups and filled them with water and set one on the table in front of Riven. The smallest thing, but chosen. Riven wrapped both hands around the cup. Gloves still on. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled the left glove off. Set it on the table. Then the right. Bare hands on a ceramic cup in a Milwaukee kitchen at midnight. He had not taken the gloves off in front of another person in 4 years. Soren looked at his hands. Did not comment. Sat down across from him. Outside, Milwaukee was quiet. A city that had held Soren and Lyric through every hard thing and asked for nothing in return. The street below the window was empty. The dry cleaner's sign was dark. The hardware store was locked. Nothing moved. And inside that kitchen, 2 people who had made real mistakes and were choosing, carefully, not to make the same ones again, sat across from each other and let the night be what it was. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of the space where forgiveness gets built. 1 cup of water. 1 pair of bare hands. 1 small green light from a baby monitor saying, "I'm here." That was enough to start. If the story hit you somewhere real, drop a comment below and tell us what part of this stayed with you. Was it Riven walking in alone? Soren's words at the door? The gloves coming off? Your thoughts matter here, and reading them inspires other people who might need to hear that healing is possible. Share this story with someone who needs it. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about accountability, about the cost of silence, about what it actually takes to come back from a wrong call, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We're not done. There are more stories coming, and every single one of them is built for people who are paying attention. See you in the next one.